History remembers kings and conquerors, but it often forgets the merchants who made empires possible. Behind the polite smiles of colonial trade and the shining marble halls of philanthropy lies one of the darkest stories of global capitalism. It is the story of a family that turned addiction into industry, who built palaces on the suffering of millions, and who set the blueprint for every corporate drug empire that followed. This is the story of the Sassoon dynasty, the merchant princes who sold the British Empire's most profitable poison opium. The tale begins in the early 1800s in the city of Baghdad, where a Jewish merchant named David Sassoon lived under growing persecution. Forced to flee with his family, he landed in Bombay, India, a city throbbing with trade under the British East India Company. He arrived as a refugee with ambition and connections, but no empire. Yet within a few decades, he would control one of the most powerful merchant networks in Asia, fueled by a substance that would bring both glory and ruin: opium. In those years, Britain faced a serious problem. China produced the tea, silk, and porcelain that Europe craved, but it wanted nothing British in return. Silver drained out of London in massive quantities, threatening the empire's economy. The East India Company needed a product China would buy, and they found it in the poppy fields of India. The plan was simple and devastating: grow opium in India, smuggle it into China, and balance the trade deficit with addiction. David Sassoon saw opportunity where others saw risk. He began investing in warehouses, caravans, and shipping routes. By partnering with British agents, he secured control over vast quantities of opium that left Bombay's docks bound for Canton. The Sassoon seal soon became a guarantee of quality in the black market of Asia. As the British Crown turned a blind eye, his fortune multiplied faster than any other private merchant of the age. By the 1840s, the Sassoons operated offices in Calcutta, Hong Kong, and Shanghai. They controlled plantations, shipping companies, insurance houses, and banks. The family's empire employed thousands and financed fleets that carried opium to every corner of China. British officials praised their efficiency while pretending not to see the moral cost. It was capitalism perfected efficient, ruthless, and deeply entangled with imperial ambition. But China did see the cost. By the late 1830s, millions were addicted. Families sold everything they owned for another pipe. Local economies collapsed, soldiers deserted, and silver flooded out of the empire. One man decided to fight back Commissioner Lin Zexu. He ordered the destruction of opium stockpiles in Canton and sent an impassioned letter to Queen Victoria demanding an end to the trade. His plea was ignored, and Britain sent warships. The First Opium War erupted in 1839, a conflict fought not for freedom but for profit. British cannons shattered China's coastal defenses. In 1842, the defeated Qing Empire signed the Treaty of Nanking, ceding Hong Kong and opening 5 ports to British merchants. For David Sassoon, this was the greatest business opportunity in history. His ships were among the first to dock in the newly opened ports, carrying their deadly cargo with the blessing of empire. With legal protection secured, the Sassoons expanded rapidly. They built factories in Shanghai, employed thousands of Chinese workers, and invested in banking, textiles, and real estate. Every part of the process, from production in India to distribution in China, was under their control. The family's fortunes soared into the millions, and they became known as the Rothschilds of the East. In London, their name carried weight, and their generosity began to reshape public memory. David Sassoon funded schools, hospitals, and synagogues in Bombay and later in Britain. The family donated to universities and libraries, earning praise as great benefactors of society. Their wealth opened doors into the British aristocracy, and knighthoods soon followed. No one wanted to remember that the money had been soaked in opium. In the eyes of the empire, the Sassoons had transformed from merchants into gentlemen. But behind the facade of charity, the damage in China was irreversible. The population of addicts reached tens of millions. Families were destroyed, and the once prosperous empire fell into chaos. The Opium Wars marked the beginning of what Chinese historians call the Century of Humiliation. It was a century of exploitation, rebellion, and foreign control, all financed by men who lived in mansions thousands of miles away. The irony of history is that those who profit from destruction often end up celebrated for their success. The Sassoon fortune diversified over generations. As opium lost its legitimacy, the family shifted to textiles, shipping, and finance. Their descendants married into British high society. By the early 20th century, the family's direct connection to the opium trade had been conveniently forgotten. Their name adorned libraries and schools, symbols of culture rather than greed. Yet history has a long memory. The very mechanisms that made the Sassoons' rich dependency, marketing, and moral disguise would return in the 20th century under a new name: pharmaceutical innovation. In the late 1990s, a different dynasty, the Sacklers, used medicine the way the Sassoons had used trade routes. They flooded the market with a product they promised would heal pain, but instead created a wave of addiction that killed hundreds of thousands. The Sacklers funded museums, universities, and art galleries, just as the Sassoons had done a century earlier. Their generosity bought silence and admiration while victims suffered in obscurity. The logos changed, the marketing became modern, but the business model was the same. Addiction was still the product, and morality was still negotiable. Both families understood the same truth. In a system built on profit, ethics are an inconvenience. The Sassoon dynasty helped shape a world where wealth could be purified through philanthropy and reputations could be rebuilt with charity. The Sacklers inherited that same belief that money, once laundered through culture, could erase its origins. And for a time, both were right. But history eventually demands its reckoning. Today, the Sackler name has been stripped from museum walls, and scholars are re-examining the empire that made the Sassoons powerful. Nations once humiliated by foreign opium now tell their side of the story. And as we uncover the truth, the pattern becomes undeniable. Every generation produces new merchants of misery, dressed in the clothing of progress. What makes this story even more unsettling is how easily society accepts it. The same governments that condemn narcotics once subsidized them. The same banks that finance trade wars now invest in pharmaceutical companies. The machinery of profit remains intact, only its slogans have changed. What used to be called trade is now called healthcare. What was once smuggling is now marketing. The story of the Sassoon dynasty is not just a tale of greed or ambition, it's the anatomy of power. It shows how the lines between legality and morality blur when money is involved. The British Empire justified opium as free trade. Modern corporations justify opioids as medicine. Both are stories of demand created, dependency sustained, and wealth extracted from suffering. In the end, David Sassoon's empire did more than change economies. It changed the moral landscape of the world. It proved that if you are rich enough, even poison can be sold as progress. And it warned us, long before our time, that when profit becomes sacred, humanity becomes expendable. That warning still echoes today, every time a new crisis of addiction spreads across the world. The Sassoon dynasty's legacy lives on, not in their palaces or their titles, but in the global systems they helped create. Systems that reward growth at any cost, celebrate wealth without asking where it came from, and hide exploitation beneath a layer of respectability. It's a legacy that still shapes how we think about business, success, and morality. So the next time we hear about a family donating millions to art or medicine, we should ask the question history often forgets to ask: where did the money come from? Because behind every fortune that seems too perfect lies a story that isn't. The Sassoons taught the world how to turn addiction into empire, and centuries later, the world is still learning how to live with the consequences.